every morning when you wake up, the ego arises because it's not a physical organ. Mm-hmm. It's a mental construct. In other words, we're giving birth to the ego, and then it dies at sunset or when we go to sleep. It disappears temporarily. And so that cycle of birth and death is there.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado, here with Dr. Rob Maldonado, and we are continuing our series on the great minds of philosophy. Buddhism was the topic for the last two episodes. Yeah. And we have one more episode today that will finish up our little chat on Buddhism, even though we could do like a whole series on this. But today we'll talk about meditation and Buddhism. But before we begin, I do want to remind you to subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, there's a little button here in the corner you can click and get notified of every episode we release on video. Let's talk about Buddhism and meditation.
Yeah, just to recap, we talked about Buddha's idea of the Four Noble Truths, philosophically, of course. And then from our perspective, we always want to get at the psychology of it. How does it help us? Like, what does it do to our mind, right? Then we talked about his beautiful concept of aggregates, that the self or the individual self, right, that we identify with, it's such a false perception that the mind creates. Mm-hmm. It creates it out of these aggregates, these elements that come together and make it appear as if we're locked into these little bodies, mm-hmm. and that's all there is to us. His idea was, no, there's a lot more to us.
And the mind beyond the body. The mind is not just in the brain.
That's right. Consciousness is universal. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to also give people a way to practice some of these things, right? Mm-hmm. And that was one of Buddha's emphasis, that you need to practice these things. In other words, this is not just to have these beautiful thoughts and just kind of amuse about these things, but that there's an actual way to experience these things, to have a direct experience of them.
So the path, part of the path to have that self-realization. That's
right. Mm-hmm. And of course, the ultimate aim in his philosophy is Nirvana, not the band.
Not the band. Pack your bags, we're going to Nirvana.
Not the destination.
It's not a destination, it's a state of mind.
Yes. Well, we'll talk about it exactly.
Okay.
But so let's talk about his philosophy of meditation and the attainment of Nirvana. So it revolves around this subjective experience of the meditator and the transformation of the mind. In Buddhism, meditation serves as a powerful tool to understand the nature of reality, overcome suffering, and ultimately achieve nirvana, which is the freedom from the cycle of birth and death, which is samsara. And we'll talk about that.
What I love about it is that meditation isn't just a stress reliever. It helps us overcome suffering in a way. But I think the key of meditation is to understand really the nature of reality and the nature, like once you realize the true nature of reality and see like through the matrix, as Keanu Reeves did in the movie, you kind of have a new perspective to approach life from. And it's not about just fixing the world out there to make it beautiful and shiny. It's about understanding the nature of things and yourself and the world. And that brings peace because you kind of have a new concept of what you're really dealing with, that philosophical concept.
I love the term samsara, which is...
It sounds sad. Samsara.
It is. Precisely.
It's like a sad kind of word, right?
It is a sad state of mind, because what it denotes is that we're caught up in this limited perspective, that our mind gets locked into this idea that we are simply physical beings struggling in life to survive and to do things, and it's sad because that's not really what the nature of reality is.
I love the metaphor of the cork bobbing on the ocean, being tossed by the waves, helpless, and just feeling powerless. That's sort of how we feel if we don't know how to work with our mind.
Yes. So through meditation, the practitioner gains insight into three marks of existence: impermanence, meaning that we have to let go of things. If we live as if things are permanent, that's one of the keys to our suffering. In other words, we're setting ourselves up for suffering. Number two, suffering itself, right? That if we set up ourselves for suffering, then when we suffer, we fall into a delusional state, essentially. We're suffering doubly because we're not only creating our own suffering, but we're perpetuating it. We're wallowing in it.
That idea that a lot of people say, I'm stuck, or you're stuck. That's what we're talking about. That they're kind of stuck in the delusion that it's permanent and nothing can change.
And then non-self or no self. Now, this is the liberating element, right? That if there is no self, not, let's say, in our sense of ego, right, our persona, like Jung would say, that it's not necessarily saying it's not a valid way of being in the world. It's simply saying that it's impermanent, meaning that it's a mental construct that we create, or our mind creates, and that we buy into it. We just think, well, this must be the way the world is, and that's all there is to it, because it appears to me that way, and everyone is buying it, therefore I'm going to buy it too, and exist in this limited way. So the Buddha and his philosophy is simply pointing the way to exiting samsara.
And wouldn't you say that meditation is really how Buddha came up with his theory and his wisdom, because he meditated and it came to him?
Yeah, I mean, and this is our perspective, but he grew up, with the Vedic tradition.
So he knew a lot of the foundational.
Yeah. But he was a reformist in this sense, that he wanted to restructure it and say, let's give this knowledge to anyone that's willing to do it, instead of just keeping it in the priestly class and then doling it out in small portions. Anyone that is really interested in transforming their lives, they can meditate, they can follow these precepts and free their mind from samsara.
It's sort of like the psychologists of the day back then, like how people dealt with their problems. He wanted to be like a psychologist, psychotherapist in those days where they didn't have someone like that. And so that's why a lot of psychologists and therapists are drawn to Buddhism too, because of the practicality of it.
Yes, he's very practical. So by directly observing these three aspects, meaning impermanence, suffering, and no self, by directly observing these three aspects in their subjective experience during meditation, the meditator begins to let go of their illusions and graspings, and leading to a deeper understanding of reality. So what is that deeper understanding of reality? And this is an important part of his teaching, right? He's saying the way the world appears to us is not reality. It's an apparent reality. It appears to us in this incredibly solid way. But he says, you can test it. You can observe that it is impermanent. Everything is changing. Everything is in flow, right? So the question then is, what is real? What is reality? If we can't depend on the external to give us that sense of reality, what do we do? And he says, the reality is within you, right? Awareness is the ultimate reality. It is the absolute reality. And the only way to affirm that and to have a direct experience of it is through meditation.
Well, one of the things that often is attributed to Buddhist teaching is this idea that there's like a blank screen, like a movie screen, and then there's the dancing movie on the screen, and that the dancing movie on the screen is what we think is our reality, which is just a moving, changing world with color and senses and emotion. But the blank screen is just neutral. It just plays upon that consciousness. And so when we're in meditation, we're sitting like as the screen, watching the movie, but trying not to get caught up in it. And so when you think about how many of us have tried to meditate, you sit there and you get caught up in your thinking. You get caught up in your thoughts, and then you get pulled away, and then you go back and you're in that screen again, and then you get into the movie again. And so it's that constant practice of letting go of that kind of need to be pulled back in. And so in that itself, that simple act of stilling your mind to not get caught up in meditation, how that can translate in the world. And when the world doesn't go according to your plan, how can you remain as, oh, okay, I'm not seeing things as clear as I want to see them.
So cultivating mindfulness. And here again, we're talking about kind of how do we prepare the mind for meditation? How do we get there? Because like you say, it's very difficult for us to meditate when we are distracted by the world.
Mm-hmm.
But
most of us, that's all we go is from distraction to distraction to distraction. And that's why a lot of people don't like to meditate, because they're just not used to sitting still and
the mind is conditioned to be stimulated all the time. So we cultivate this mindfulness through fully being present and attentive to the arising and passing of thoughts. So this is not deep meditation. In other words, you can do it by contemplation, right? Mm-hmm. Pay attention to what your mind is thinking and observe how that they come. In other words, you're not willing a thought to arise. The thought arises on its own. The mind simply, that's what it does. Just like your heart pumps blood, your mind creates thoughts. That's its function as an organ. So you want to start to pay attention to it. Pay attention to feelings. Feelings, again, you don't really create them. It's not like you're willing a certain feeling to arise. Feelings arise from your interaction with the environment. Sensations, but look at them without judgment. Now, this is the key, right? Because we're trained most of the time to think in terms of good and bad. Is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Is this positive? Is this negative? Is this toxic or non-toxic? We want to drop all that in mindfulness and just observe with no judgment. Mm-hmm. It's a very kind of stilling and peaceful state of mind that we create, because we're not anxious about anything. We're not judging things as bad and trying to get rid of them or trying to create some great experience. We're just observing.
And we're not trying to detach and push away, but we're not attached. So it's a very delicate balance of allowing it to arise without pushing it away or buying into it.
Yeah. You know how I would describe it is like you're transparent. You become transparent, very light.
That's really, beautiful.
Yeah. So understanding the nature of reality and then practicing this observance of your mind, right? This mindfulness. Calming the mind, maybe similar, but a little bit more intense, because now you're really intending to calm the mind by developing one-pointed focus. A one-pointed focus. This is mentioned in the Gita as well, and in many of the Upanishads. This ability to make the mind one-pointed is essential for spiritual practice and growth.
And a lot of the meditations I've done in different meditation centers focus on a dot on the wall, focus on a spot on the floor, focus on, a point in your, like the left nostril, breathing in, or holding your, focusing on just your breath. You're kind of pulling the mind into one focus. And because our world, especially now, everything is so distracting, as we talked about before, it's really, really, even now, it's harder, I think, for people than maybe 100 years ago, where there wasn't as much technology out there, that you don't have that space anymore to just be and kind of just be in that presence of one thing.
Yeah. And the mind becomes like a laser beam or a sword. Sometimes it's represented as a sword, because it's able to cut through the illusion of the world to get to the absolute reality. The other one is insight, gaining insight through meditation. So now we're seeing kind of the spectrum of meditation, right? That you have to begin with understanding the philosophy. Why are you meditating? It's not about, like you say, relaxation or stress management.
Which it's part of it. It's great for that.
It's a side effect.
Yeah, side effect. It's not the purpose.
But the real discipline of it, right? This is mental training, and Buddha was known for his rigorous mental training. He was he was not going to get up from that tree until he got it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's his philosophy, that you have to use your self-effort to get your mind to do what you need it to do.
Can I share a story? Well, when this insight meditation is actually, I was reading some Buddhist texts, and actually we were going to a Zen Buddhist center in New Rochelle, and I was really meditating every day. Just got to meditate, and I was in the beginning. You and I weren't even working together. I was starting my little hypnotherapy business, and I was, kind of a little worried about money and if I was going to succeed, and had just a little stress in my life, and I just felt like I had to do a lot in order to be successful. And I remember sitting to meditate, and I had this beautiful view of the Long Island Sound from our apartment, and it was just a beautiful place to meditate, and I just didn't want to sit there. I just did not want to sit there, and I was sitting there, and I was wrestling with my thoughts, and I'm going to just stay here because there's some resistance here. And I was just listening to my mind talk about how worried I was about everything, and is everything going to work out? And then all of a sudden this idea popped into my head, and it said, remember how you were so worried about love and now you found love? Well, why can't it work out the same way? Like you're pre-worrying about something that is never going to come to be. And it would just release so much from that one insight. And it was like, kind of like, I don't know if it was words I heard, but it was just this idea that just kind of settled within me going, we've been through this before. And what I realized is that the mind is always going to worry about something. So if it's not about love, it's going to be about money. And if it's not about money, it's going to be worried about your health or your parents or something else. It's always going to be something. And it's like, it's always something with the mind. And then that gave me that other part, that realization of the nature of the mind. And then also gave me an insight to how I was thinking. So it was a really incredible experience. And then after that, it was interesting how things just started to flow in the outer world, because my mind wasn't filled with the junk of fear and worry and stress. It just kind of created a space in my mind to create something else.
Absolutely. So through insight meditation, you are developing a penetrating insight into the true nature of existence, the true nature of your mind.
And the delusion, right?
Yeah.
The suffering and delusion that the mind creates. It was such a powerful experience. I always mark it down as like one of my top 5 things that happened to me that shifted my life. And that's how powerful meditation is. You get more from it, I think, than just reading theory. You have to practice. That's the benefit of it. You have to wrestle with these ideas and face this mind that my ego was like, nope, you don't want to sit there. You want to get going and get some things accomplished. Like, no, I have to sit here and I have to do this.
Yeah, there's some great research being done at the University of Wisconsin, and it shows that it actually changes the structure of the brain. So when people talk about rewiring, this is the way to rewire your mind and your brain. It actually changes the physical structure of it through even short-term meditation. Some of the studies just involved 8 weeks of meditation, and already they could see changes in the brain structure. But imagine long-term meditators that have been meditating for years. So it begins to break apart the roots of suffering and delusion, which is samsara.
And I remember Ram Dass, he was a meditator for, he said 36 years, but he was not doing it in the way that intended. He said he spent 30 years or 36 years meditating on his delusions and getting caught up in them versus not agreeing with them, like just thinking. It's just sitting there thinking. So what we're doing is we're not just sitting there thinking, we're sitting there watching our thinking and being observant and open and non-judgmental. So that's the key.
Yeah, that's why it always begins with study, so that you know what the philosophy is talking about and the nature of the mind. It puts you on the right track. So finally, Nirvana.
I want to go. Can we go?
You want to go to Nirvana?
Yeah, let's go.
We're going to do a retreat in Nirvana.
Tickets are free.
So it's the ultimate goal of meditation in Buddhism. And it refers to the liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Now, this is tricky because psychologically, what does this mean, right? What is happening psychologically when someone is released from the cycle of birth and death? So, yeah, we can think of it in religious terms, of course, but we want to keep it at the philosophical, psychological level here. I think what it's saying is that the ego, right? If you notice, every morning when you wake up, the ego arises because it's not a physical organ, it's a mental construct. In other words, we're giving birth to the ego, and then it dies at sunset or when we go to sleep. It disappears temporarily. And so that cycle of birth and death is there in miniature in our everyday
Many
life.
lives. Every day is a life.
Yes. So in essence, Nirvana is breaking that spell to where we don't have to recreate the ego and let it drive our life over and over again.
And in deep sleep, we reach it, but then we don't remember it because there was no witness to remember. But we know we were somewhere because we know we were not there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we can have it in a waking state. And that's the goal, is to take that no self state into a conscious experience.
Yes. I think the more you practice meditation, I mean, I think the gift is that each one of us experiences in a unique way, right? But yet it's universal that we're reaching this state of no self, this emptiness, this pure awareness that is universal. It's the consciousness that we all share. The apparent reality is that we're all different and we all have these personalities, and that we think that's us, but it's not, because if it's an apparent reality, that means it's unreal.
The only thing that causes suffering in our life is that we believe we're the ego. That's really the only problem that we have, the source of all suffering. And if we can break free of that attachment to the ego, we can be in nirvana. And it's not like an off and on switch. It's you evolve into that. You have moments of nirvana, and then you lose it again, and then you have moments of nirvana, and then you have, it's kind of like a mastering the mind to hold that state.
There are different ways to conceptualize, but I think the what they're saying is that it's already there.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
I'm
more
saying
that
our
it's
experience.
covered.
Yeah,
right. That it's covered over, and so you never lose it. You're simply paying attention to the wrong thing. You're paying attention to your ego and investing yourself in it, believing that you are the ego.
Well, you lose your focus.
Yes.
And you forget, but it's still there. You're just focused on something else.
But the nirvana is there.
Yeah.
Because it is the essence.
We're just not aware
of who we are.
It kind of blinks in and out of existence, on our conscious experience.
Yes.
Yes.
So all the schools that arose from the Upanishads, from the Vedic traditions, talk about this wisdom mind. Now in psychology, the closest we come to in Western psychology, I'd say, is the executive functioning. But that sounds very, kind of almost like a company with these directors.
The CEO.
The CEO running the head of the mind, the brain. But the wisdom mind, sometimes it's translated as the intellect or this deeper wisdom mind that is able to observe, or the witness mind, right? That is able to observe our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without being caught up in them. I think this is the key to meditation. If you are able to cultivate this ability to observe, right, your thoughts, think of what it means logically.
You're not identifying with it?
Well, that you're not your thoughts.
Yeah.
That if you're able to observe your thoughts, that must mean there's another part of you that is observing it. Therefore, that's the higher mind. That's the wisdom mind.
I like to think of the conscious mind, the level of thinking and thought is 3 levels. The first level is just that stream of narrative that goes on that we're not really paying attention to, but we hear it. And then the second level is that executive functioning, where we're like kind of analyzing and examining our thoughts and going, wow, I can't believe I thought that, or this is interesting, but you still want to change it. You want to make decisions from through the observing of your thoughts and analyzing and your memories and all those. But that witness mind is that third higher level where you're not trying to analyze, you're not trying to fix the thoughts, you're not trying to get rid of them. You're just being in that pure non-judgment. And I think I think some people confuse that. They think if they're analyzing their thoughts, it's just this higher intellect that's doing that. But sometimes it's just your ego analyzing itself versus this higher witness mind, which is, I would say, not your ego.
Yeah, good point. I would say then that probably the way to verify whether it's ego or the wisdom mind is to notice whether it's judging good and bad, right? The dualistic nature of the ego.
Yes.
Because that gives it away. Whenever there's a judgment of good or bad, right or wrong.
Or I need to fix it, or there's urgency to like figure something out.
That's ego. Yeah. Whereas that witness mind is non-judging. It's simply like observing. Where it's like that eye, the mind's eye, just observing itself without judgment, without trying to fix. And then cultivating that wisdom mind then leads to really that stilling of the mind, stilling of thoughts, where you're able to see the true nature of the mind, which is nirvana. What is at the essence of us in the core of the mind? It is pure awareness. And by all accounts, it's pure bliss, pure consciousness, pure being. No complications.
It's like empty, like that emptiness we talked about in the earlier episode. It doesn't have any content to it. It's just being. It's like, just this empty of judgment, empty of attachment. And it's really, that's where peace lies. It's not, it could be nice getting a massage and going to listening to beautiful music. I also want to just mention, do you recommend listening to music meditating? I've always was taught that not having music is better because you're not distracted by the music. But maybe in the beginning, it might be something for people to relax themselves. What is your opinion on that?
I think in the beginning, you can use it. And also towards the end, you can also use it. Because then you understand it, that it's just part of it. In other words, once you start to realize the nature of reality, you understand that there's nothing that is outside of that pure consciousness. Any thought, emotion, thing, object, perception is consciousness itself. So there's no distinction. Therefore, it doesn't bother you. So it is the way that we escape or transcend suffering. In other words, suffering can be transcended. And that's the great message of the Buddha, that we can transcend suffering. We don't have to suffer all our lives.
And I think the main message from Eastern philosophy is that suffering, because we have circumstances in our life, that we think what will end the suffering is to change the outer circumstances versus changing our mind about the outer circumstances. And we're chasing happiness in the external, and it's in here. And once you have it in here, it reflects out there. And we're all conditioned to do it the opposite. It's like, you got to get everything lined up out there, then I can relax. And I remember, actually, my coach at the time, she was saying, we were on a trip together, and she was like, oh, I finally, I'm so glad I got that thing taken care of, because now I can relax. And I'm like, oh, so you needed that thing to be taken care of to relax? I was just teasing her because she would always teach that to me. And it's so funny how we forget, because we're so externally driven in the everyday world. There's so many distractions. So the meditation practice itself helps us kind of have a more solid ground while we're acting in the world, so we don't get caught up in it. And at first you get caught up in the world and you bring yourself back, and then it happens less and less. And then you really feel that locus of control is within yourself and not feeling pulled by the world. So it's a beautiful experience. And it doesn't mean you can't have beautiful things in your life and create in your life and all those things, but you enjoy them more when you're not attached to them. And you enjoy them more when you're not chasing them or fear of losing them. You enjoy them just in the moment, just in their beingness. And I think that's really what is supposed to be experienced in this life. We're so glad you decided to join us today. If you haven't meditated before, practice. Just close your eyes and just watch your thoughts. Practice not getting caught up in them. Practice non-judgment. Share your comments below if you're on YouTube, how your experience is with meditations, what's worked for you, what hasn't. We'd love to hear from you. And I just wanted to remind you to click subscribe here and the button if you're watching us on YouTube. We'll continue our series with the philosophy, the great philosophers of mind next week. Hope to see you then.